Today we're going to be painting a whale shark using watercolors. Let me show you guys the supplies I have today. This is my Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolor pan set. It does come with a water brush. I'm not going to be using that today. Instead, I will be using a Kolinsky Sable Creative Mark round brush size 8. I have water jars and paper towel, which is essential for controlling how much water is in your brush. And then for the white spots in the whale shark, there are a couple different ways to do that, and I'm going to show you guys both ways that I've chosen. I'm going to be using masking fluid to show you one method for doing the spots, and then bleed proof white, which is an opaque watercolor white that you can use at the very end to add the spots. So I'll show you guys both of those. My paper is Fabriano Artistico 140-pound cold pressed paper, and it's on a block, which means that the sides are glued down, and this helps prevent warping and buckling. This is a great way to paint smaller. If you're using larger blocks, you'll still end up with a little bit of warping, so just keep that in mind. But for this project, I think a 5x7 block is great. To start out, we're going to do the sketch. And don't be intimidated by this. This creature is actually really simple to sketch, and I'll show you a couple of easy measurements that will help with that. So the first thing you want to do is decide where the tip of the head and the tip of the tail are going to go. So deciding on the overall dimensions of your whale shark. So I'm going to fill him up pretty much in the whole space. There's going to be his nose, and the tip of his tail will be somewhere down here. And then you also want to decide on the curve of his body. So make a curved line connecting the nose to the tip of the tail so that you can see the trajectory of his body. The next thing is to make a little tick mark dividing your line in half. From there, make another tick mark that's almost halfway up, not quite halfway. And that is actually going to be where the tail ends. So to draw the tail, you can just add a nice little point here, and then a little fin like that. And we'll connect the rest of that in a second. And then where you marked your halfway point and the tip of the nose, go another halfway up, right there. And that is going to be where the two fins come down. Before we add that, let's draw the shape of the head. The head is the widest part of the animal. So you can start with one side and then the other, and if you're using pencil, it can always be changed. And this is where we marked where the fins are going to start, and the fins just come out like this. Nothing too complex about those shapes. And then the next thing will just be to connect this part to the tail. The body shape gets significantly skinnier as the whale shark comes down towards the tail. It's not nearly as thick as the head. So make it skinnier and skinnier towards the tail. And just like that, you've got the shape of a whale shark. I'm going to erase my center line and actually redraw that so it's more exactly in the center. And right here, just below the baseline of these two fins, in the center of the body, I'm going to draw the large center fin, and then a little smaller fin right there. And that's it for the drawing. So we are ready to start painting. If you're using masking fluid to preserve the white of the paper for the spots, this is the first thing you're going to want to start with. And I'm only going to use this for a few of the spots just to show you guys how to do it. So I'm using some white masking fluid. This is Turner Artist Watercolor Masking Fluid. Winsor & Newton works just fine, or whatever masking fluid you have. And then I just have a little rubber tipped brush. You can see it's just a wiggly rubber tip in the end. And with that, I'm just going to dip into the masking fluid, taking a small amount, and I'm going to apply a couple of little spots coming all the way across the body. You want to create this curved line, mimicking the shape of the cylindrical body coming around. Don't make it a perfectly straight line with these dots. And try to make them parallel with each other. These animals are so beautiful, with this gorgeous symmetry in their bodies. All right, so that's all I'm going to do for the masking fluid. The rest of the spots I'm going to be using the bleed proof white. I'm going to show you guys at the end how they look different and how they look similar, and just how both methods can really work well for painting white and watercolor. Now while the masking fluid is drying, we can begin the watery background. For this, we'll be using the wet and wet technique. Now, if your paper is just laying flat on a surface, if it's not on a block like mine is, then you're gonna probably experience some warping and buckling unless you securely tape down the sides. So if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and do that now. Now on my Winsor & Newton Cotman palette here, I have a couple of different blues. This is ultramarine and this is turquoise blue. The ultramarine is a warmer blue, which means it leans more towards purple or red, and the turquoise blue is a cooler blue, which means it leans more towards green and yellow. And then I'll also be using my Payne's gray. I want to create a vignette effect where the water is lighter as it comes toward the whale shark and then darker around the edges. And I want it to look really artistic and kind of splotchy. I'm not worried about perfect flat washes here at all. So I'm taking my round brush, dipping it in the clean water, and I'm generously going to apply this paint all over. If this color overlaps into the fish, that's totally okay for now because the whale shark is going to be much darker than the water. So if you do overlap a little, no worries. So this portion of the project can be a little messy. Just dollop the water on generously. Now, if you're in a dry environment like I am and your paper dries really fast, you might want to just let this sit for a little bit, let the water kind of sink in, and then go back in and do another layer of water over the top. So it's really, really wet. I've even allowed a little bit of pooling to happen, but overall it's really just lovely, glossy wet. So I'm going to start with my turquoise blue. This is the cooler blue color, and I'm swirling my brush in the pan to get a juicy amount of paint in my brush. Close to the whale shark, I'm dropping in that wonderful blue. I'm not painting it in solid. I'm skipping little areas of white in the middle. And this is important to get that shimmery effect. Leave some of the white of your paper exposed. This is something wonderful about watercolor, to have that translucent, luminous look to the paper. Leave a little of it untouched. And then as we come closer to the edges, I'm grabbing ultramarine. This is that warmer blue. And leaving fewer gaps of white as we come closer to the edges to create the effect of a darker vignette. Notice how fast I'm working. I know I look like I'm on fast forward, but I'm really just working fast. I'm not speeding up this footage at all. Just blotting on the paint. Sometimes blooms and blossoms will happen. You may have a little bit of extra water in your brush that'll push the paint aside and cause that effect. That's okay. We're going to fully embrace that with this painting. We just want to see what happens. Before I go to my darkest color, I'm rinsing that out. And then I'm actually going to grab a little bit of this green that's on my palette, mixing it up on the palette first just to see what it looks like, with a little bit of water, removing any excess. And I'm going to drop that green just in a couple little spots, kind of swirling with it on the paper. This is your playground. This is your opportunity just to have so much fun with your paints and your paper. Dipping into the turquoise blue a little bit again and creating darker splashes of color. All of this should be softening really nicely on your wonderful wet paper. Push and pull the shapes around. If you're not happy with any of the shapes, if they feel a little too uniform or a little bit too abstract, just keep playing with it. You're at the stage right now before it's drying. When you can do that, you can manipulate the paint still, push it around. Okay, so now I'm going to dip into my Payne's gray, grab a juicy amount of paint, mixing it up on my palette first. I want to make sure it's nice and dark. And now I'm going to apply this to the edges, particularly in the corners. A little bit extra in the corners, I think. At this stage in the painting too, if you want to, you can add blooms. blooms are when you take little drops of water and just drop them on the paper. And what happens is there's this expansion, this explosion of the paint. Let's try one right here. You can see how it just pushes the paint aside, creating this wonderful firework effect. I'm going to dip into my ultramarine a little bit more. Make sure that you don't have too much water on your brush if you decide to add additional paint. And I'm just adding a few more pops of that pure, warm ultramarine to the water, helping balance out that color scheme. And then I'm going to add a little more green right here. As I said, play with your shapes until you're happy with them. Don't settle if it's not something that you're happy with. All right, I think I like that. It looks mysterious, oceanic. So let's give it a few minutes to dry completely before we paint the whale shark. Okay, our paper is dry enough that we can safely paint the area inside of the whale without disturbing our water layer. I'm switching to a smaller brush. This is a Kolinsky Sable size 4 round brush, and this will just help me stay inside the lines a little bit better than the larger brush. So we're going to be using the same colors for the inside of the whale as we did on the water, in just a little bit different way. For the whale, I'm going to be using a lot of the Payne's gray. It's going to be very, very dark. And then in some of the slightly lighter areas, like on the fins, we'll be using the turquoise blue. So let's start with that Payne's gray. I'm reactivating the paint on my little palette here, just adding a little bit of water and swirling it around so that I have a very, very dark, juicy amount on the tip of my brush. And with that, I'm going to start painting inside of my pencil lines. You can just see how dark that paint is. Very carefully around these edges. Grabbing a little bit of water, and then once I've got that edge down, I can paint more quickly. And so we'll do that same thing inside of the fin. We'll work slowly as we paint along those edges. And then once you've got your edges, then you can fill it in quickly. And we'll do the other fin here. We are painting wet and dry right now, which means that your edges are going to dry really fast because we didn't pre-soak the paper. So in areas like this where I have an unresolved edge, it might be a good idea to brush that out right away, just to take care of that before moving on. Have to keep that in mind, otherwise those weird edges will form. Now I'm going to grab a little of that turquoise blue, paint that along the fin, both fins there. You can see I wasn't real careful with that. And then along the side of the body, and then with my Payne's gray, working quickly, I'm going to paint along that edge and paint that right up to the blue. This is really kind of wet next to wet, and what will happen is that the colors will blend naturally side by side next to each other. Do be careful that you don't have a lot of water in your brush when you're using this technique, because these will happen. And those should always be intentional, not accidental. That'll just happen. The more you get used to painting with watercolor, the more practice, you'll start to understand the timing and how much water you can have and get away with in your brush. I'm mixing in a little bit of turquoise blue here, slightly varying the colors in the tail, and then finishing up with the Payne's gray in the tail itself. Still have to grab more paint, make sure that it's really dark here for the little tail, and paint slowly so that you can create nice straight lines and edges. All right, so there's the whale shark's body. I'm just going to darken one more time along that edge, and try not to dip your hand in the paint. Okay, we're gonna let that dry completely, and then we can do the spots. One quick thing I decided I want to add before we add the spots to the whale shark is some spatter. And we're gonna stick with some color harmony for this. I just want to add little hints of watercolor spatter for that wonderful whimsical effect that watercolor can offer. And we're gonna stick with our blues. I think I'm gonna do this with actually let's use the larger brush for this. So I'm gonna dip it in the water and then swirl some ultramarine onto my palette. Lots of paint, lots of water. And then I'm actually gonna mix my green in with that for kind of this marine blue look. And then with that, I'm going to gently tap my brush. This can go all over, even over the whale. That's not a problem. And then if you want to, you can do some more manufactured circle shapes, sort of giving the impression of bubbles under the water. These should be designed. Don't make it haphazard. Put them in places where you feel they will add to the composition. The reason I'm doing this before I do the spots is because I don't want any of this blue to get into my white paint when I add those spots later. I think that adds a fun effect. I can allow some of these to overlap the whale shark. Make the sizes all different sizes, bigger and smaller. Variety is key here. And I think I'm gonna add one more kind of big one right here. So now we can set our paints aside and grab the Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. If you don't have this, you can use white gouache or white acrylic paint. You could also use a gel pen, would work just fine for adding those little dots to the whale shark. Now the whale shark is dry enough that we can remove our masking fluid. For this, I tend to just use my fingers. You'll want to be fairly gentle. Make sure there's no oils or any wetness whatsoever on your fingers. And so you guys can clearly see how the white of the paper was perfectly preserved by that effect. And so you could do that all the way across the whale shark for a really cool effect. Now to show you my other method, I'm going to take a tiny little arteza liner brush, dip directly into the bleed proof white. So you see I have a tiny little amount on my brush here. And this is going to be the portion of the painting that probably takes the longest because you're going to want to apply your little dots very carefully. Make sure you can rest your hand on something. And really what we're doing is we're drawing little half circles across the body using dots. Be sure to add a couple of dots to the fins. These don't have to be quite as linear or as patterned. And here towards the nose, you'll notice I angled my lines in towards the front of the head, and the spots will start to fade out towards the tail. So I'm being a lot more sparing with them towards the end here. There we go. So there's our finished whale shark. If you guys haven't already watched my koi fish tutorial, this one's pretty similar. Check out this video if you haven't watched that one yet. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.